Welcome, and here we go again. And today I will be taking a look at why the RTD era of Doctor Who was, in my opinion, the peak of the programme. Now, as you may be aware, the RTD era was the era between 2005 and 1st of January 2010, in which Russell T Davies ran the show. This era encompassed Christopher Ecclestone and David Tennant's runs as the Doctor, and featured the appearance of many fan favourite characters, monsters, etc. So, I think it may be arguably the most popular of the show now in the show's history. Now, I think personally it is, in terms of the peak of the show, how popular it is, and I think in terms of New Who, it's definitely the most popular and definitely the best era. Now, there's many reasons for that. So RTD managed to create this great structure of television here, and it sort of picked up from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer Angel sort of structure, which involved the spin-off shows and the characters all coming together at the end and a big crossover event, and the shows integrating into each other. And he sort of took that formula and played with it a bit. Now, this era was 4 seasons, plus a few specials, obviously, which were so perfectly crafted and built up towards Stolen Earth Jenny's End, which was the big finale. Now, this finale featured characters like Rose, Martha, Donna, Jack, Wilf, Mickey, all the mothers, Jackie, all sorts of characters, and probably Sarah Jane, of course, all sorts of characters, even the Tortured and Sarah Jane adventures, Gwen Cooper and Ianto Jones and Luke from Sarah Jane all made appearances, and it was a massive crossover event and the biggest the show has ever been. And I think when you take that, when you look at how perfectly structured everything is in that episode to build up towards that point, it was so massive back at the time. And how they managed to land that big episode is because it was the peak of the show. Now, when you look at the characters, they are some of the most popular characters the show has ever produced. Donna Noble, for example, is a very popular companion, and you can see why. She's very sassy and strong-willed, with a great performance from Catherine Tate. And Jack, played by John Barrowman, who obviously returned this season and was the first character to ever get his own spin-off show. He was a proper icon for the LGBT community because there had never been a staple like that in the show, a proper, LGBT companion. Wilf, for example, Wilfred Mott is a character that's so charming and lovable and sweet and played wonderfully by Bernard Cribbins. And it's great that we get to see him take on the role of the companion in Tennant's final story at the end of time. So the characters obviously are great. Obviously the Doctors, both of the Doctors, Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant, are great, likeable, well acted, well written, multi sort of dimensional instantly. They have dark sides and light sides, which is great. And yeah, I think when you look at it, those characters were so popular that bringing them all together was such a extraordinary, exciting moment in Stolen Earth Journey's End. Before that, we'd seen characters come together, like Martha and Jack met, for example, or Martha and Donna met, or Rose and Donna met. And it was always exciting when you got to see different characters and companions play off together and meet each other and everything. The way that the Dalek plot is structured over the 4 seasons, with the sort of Cult of Skaro and the Time War and that chronology, it all follows on from each other. Dalek, Parting of the Ways, Doomsday, Daleks in Manhattan and Stolen Earth Journey's End, all of them are a perfectly correlated arc of the Dalek story, culminating in the appearance of Davros, which was also a massive moment in Stolen Earth Journey's End. And, there's never been a story like it, and there's never been a sort of era like it where all these characters have built up to meet at the end. The story arcs are also well adjusted, really, and Bad Wolf is mentioned throughout the series unsubtly, and becomes very relevant in Rose's story and the Doctor's story, obviously. We get Tortured in Series 2, which is referenced a lot, and we get the pathway towards Jack joining Tortured, which obviously kickstarted the spin-off series, which had connections to the show, obviously having appearances from Martha Jones and having Gwen and Tosh and stuff pop up in Doctor Who. You've got the Series 3 arc with Harold Saxon and Yana and the Fob Watch and all that, which is so perfectly brought together. Series 4, you've got the Rose appearing through the timeline, and when you look at moments like that and just how big the show was, and everybody cared about it back then. Everybody cared about those arcs, not just the fans. When Rose popped up in Partners in Crime, even casual fans were like, oh my god, it's Rose Tyler, because they were so iconic because of the popularity of the show and because it was so well written and acted. And it was because it had been brought so effectively into the modern age by Russell T Davies. He managed to maintain some of those foundations of the show from the classic era, but also put a fresh spin on those ideas and put a fresh spin on Daleks and Cybermen and the Master and even the Doctor and the role of the companion. The role of the companion is much more enhanced. The role of the companion isn't just a side character, isn't just there to scream or be saved. The companion is there to save the day often and to save the Doctor, which is really nice. And the characters get so much more developed here than in any other era of the show. They get families, and we get to see how their domestic life is affected by their travels in the TARDIS. We get to see their love lives and their friendships and their personal lives and their mothers and their fathers and all that sort of thing. And it works so effectively and often emotionally in how it's handled, which is lovely. And the different ways the families perceive their adventures with the Doctor and the different ways they end up at the end of the companion's run is so different from one another, which is really interesting. Obviously, in End of Time Part 2, you have another big moment where characters like Sarah Jane Smith and Jack and Martha and Mickey and even the Human Nature Woman and Rose and Martha and Donna, all sorts of things, they all pop up one last time, and it's a lovely farewell tour. And again, it shows just how popular these characters are, that they had such a demand to bring them back and show them off and everything. First of all, Sarah Jane, and not only the Sarah Jane Adventures, but bringing back Sarah Jane was a wonderful decision. I think that keeps that familiarity from the classic era, and because she's such an iconic character, is one of my favourite decisions Russell T Davies made, to bring Elizabeth Sladen back, to give her own show, and which was popular in its own right. I mean, Torchwood and Sarah Jane Adventures are probably more popular than the main show is currently, or were back at the time. And, Sarah Jane was such an iconic character back in Classic Who, and she's built up, and her character is stronger and more feisty and more multi-dimensional, really, which is great. And Elizabeth Sladen really gets to sort of do well with that. Everybody's perfectly casted, everybody's well done. When you look at it, a lot of people argue that Stolen Earth Journey's End should be the last story of the RTD era because it's so big. I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I often think that, but when you look at it, you've got the End of Time Part 2, which is a great conclusion because it resolves all those extra hanging threads. We get the Time Lords appear, which is the ultimate threat and the thing that the RTD had been building up to since the start. Again, an evidence of how perfectly built up it was and how perfectly planned it was from the start. And you get the resolution of the Master, who was left open a bit in terms of his sort of resurrection in the Series 3 finale. So everything is perfectly placed. Most episodes seem to have some sort of relevance to the general arc, or a character who becomes significant, or a reference to something that is significant. And in that way, it's such an iconic and fabulous era. Because of that, Doctor Who was so popular. I mean, it was at its peak of its popularity. Its viewing figures were phenomenal. Episodes like Voyage of the Damned, mainly because it featured Kylie, were incredibly popular. Journey's End, of course, was insanely popular. And of course, I have to mention that, whole family sat down to watch it, and particularly on Christmas Day, which was also another wonderful decision to have a Christmas special. Families just sat down, they watched Doctor Who, they could get into it instantly. It was so popular. All people of all ages. There was things for all ages. There were even adulty references and everything. You had wonderful villains. You had the Doctor Who Confidential show, which was on since 2005. You had the Tortured and Sarah Jane Adventures, of course. You had Totally Doctor Who. You had Doctor Who tours and experiences and proms and all that sort of thing. You had trading cards and merchandise and everything. You had Doctor Who was at its peak back then. The merchandising was through the roof in terms of its production and even popularity. So when you look at it, there's never been an era which is quite so phenomenally popular and quite so brilliantly crafted as the RTD era. Now, I love the Stephen Moffat era, but it didn't have that same craft to it. It felt like it was planned each season through. It didn't feel like it had something that was planned from the 11th hour that was resolved in, say, the Twice Upon a Time. Or Chibnall era, I don't see there being anything set up in Series 11 that's not resolved until the end. So just everything was so perfectly structured, everything was so popular, everything was so successful. In my opinion, it was the peak of Doctor Who. Please leave your thoughts on the RTD era of the show. There's a watch along on Sunday from 7 of Stolen Earth Journey's End if you'd like to join in. And that's from 7, and we're watching both parts, Netflix, iPlayer, DVD, whatever. And I think Russell T Davies is joining in, so that would be cool. And tomorrow I'll be picking out a random episode and reviewing it in my random review. So please tune in for that. I'll see you tomorrow, guys. Goodbye.